Today, we're going to talk about motorcycle braking, what their capabilities are, and why that matters to us compared to other vehicles on the road. So let's look at myth and reality. Most riders believe that they can stop faster than other vehicles on the road, and that's just not true. Motorcycles and cars actually stop in very similar distances, with cars actually having a slight advantage mechanically. A motorcycle's stopping capability is around 1 G. So we looked at the licensing motorcycle test as well as rider training exit requirements, and they were around a half a G. So their graduation standard is roughly 1/2 of the capability of the motorcycle. So a new rider or a graduate of a motorcycle training course generally stops around a 0.5 G or half a G. An experienced rider, one with training who knows their own motorcycle, stops around 0.7 Gs. An expert and the vehicle capability of virtually every motorcycle on the road is around 1 G. When we compare this to other vehicles on the road, they're all stopping around 1 G as well. So there's no mechanical advantage for the motorcycle to stop faster. The difference is the driver and the rider. So we took some motorcycles and we wanted to calculate exactly how much distance that really was between the new rider and an expert rider. So we took the new rider and they came down at 15 miles per hour. They stopped at a half a G. It was 15 feet. The expert came down at 15 miles per hour. He stopped at a 1 G and stopped in only 8 feet. The difference between the two was 7 feet. That's about the length of a car, or at least a motorcycle. Now if we double that, we're at 30 miles per hour. Now the distances grow, and at half a G, we're at 60 feet. A 1 G is at 30 feet. The difference there, you can park a school bus between you. So taking the speeds up to more realistic numbers, we went ahead and did the braking at 45 miles per hour. Again, the new rider came down. They stopped at 135 feet. When the expert came down and stopped, they stopped in only 67 feet. The difference between those two stops is the same distance as a semi-truck with a trailer attached. That is a lot of distance at 45 miles an hour. Perfect. All right, so let me explain kind of where this all goes. When we talk about the 1 G, what we're talking about is an average deceleration rate of those vehicles. And it's the easiest way to measure performance against one vehicle to the other, whether it's a two-wheeled vehicle or whether it's a four-wheel. Essentially, if you're looking at a graph, you have a half G at the bottom, 1.5. There's a period of time when you first start applying your brakes where you're going to definitely be below that 1 G. As you come towards the end of the stop near threshold, you're going to be exceeding 1 G. So if you have a bike and you're up on a stoppie or you get a front wheel skid, you know you've just met or just exceeded that braking threshold. And what we're doing is just averaging that 1 G. As I get into this, there's what really is important is this area here, how quickly you ramp up to get to that threshold will change the outcome. So you might hit threshold. Some of you may ride and you go, well, you know, I can do maximum braking because I've done a stoppie, or I've done maximum braking because I can get that front wheel skid right at the end of the stop. And the reality is you may not be doing as well as you think you are. And that's what I'm going to show you some of the numbers here and then give you an idea of how to actually solve and fix that. What I did when I started this research project is I found two sources that did their own testing. Then they weren't using numbers from the manufacturers or anything else. And this is Motorcycle Consumer News and then Car and Driver. These are the two sources. And most importantly, that we had a consistent source of numbers. What we have found is the numbers that we tested to verify if their testing numbers were the same as ours, we came on spot on almost every time. So I'm pretty convinced that their testing process matched ours. The pictures you see here, these four comparisons are both a four-wheel vehicle and a two-wheel vehicle that have virtually identical stopping numbers. So you look at that Chevy Camaro to a Honda Goldwing. The interesting one I always think is looking down at the bottom when you look at like the GSX-R, the Hayabusa, which by all rights should be a phenomenal braking motorcycle based on the length and the performance of the braking system, but it matches up with a Chevy Silverado, which is definitely not a performance vehicle. What I'm looking at here is we have 3 different minivans. Just to kind of show a cross section, you'll notice all of them are floating right around that 1G mark. But the bikes at the top are all very significantly different. On one side you have a heavyweight cruiser. This is not a performance motorcycle. And on the other side you have a commuter, a beginner bike, a 250 Virago. Again, not something we would consider a high performance bike. In the middle, of course, the Panigale. These numbers are all about the same. That Harley is stopping at a 1G, the Panigale at a 1.06, and the Yamaha at a 1.07. So even though these are very different motorcycles by weight, by performance characteristic, and by tires, it turns out they end up with the same stopping distance. Now, when you look at this, one of the first things that always comes to mind is there's no debate that the braking system and the tires in that Panigale are far superior to the other 2 bikes. But that Harley only has to stop once well. And that's the key, is it only has to stop once. When you look at thresholds for those motorcycles, you have 2 different limits. When you look at the Harley or the cruisers, they're fairly long chassis with a low center of gravity. When you look at the sport bike, they're very short and they have a very high center of gravity. So what essentially happens here is when that Harley comes in and does a stop, it loses traction before anything else, and that traction turns out to be around 1G. The sport bikes have a far superior braking system because, again, they're not made to stop. They're made to slow. The Panigale is made to go really fast a whole lot of times and slow from triple-digit speeds. What happens there is it has all the traction, but it doesn't have any balance. It's too short. Because it has a high center of gravity, what happens is the back wheel starts to come off the ground. So you end up with a stoppie. Again, turns out it's around 1G. If you look at the performance characteristic of the tires, they exceed that 1G significantly. If you look at the cornering numbers and everything else, and we're talking about peak numbers, where here we're talking about an averaging. And that's why you start seeing that the motorcycles essentially have this same braking capability. And that's a good place to start when you start going, okay, where do we land on this? To give another example of this, the chart on the right with all those motorcycles, those are all beginner bikes lined up with non-beginner bikes. If you look at the numbers, they're all matched up. The bike on the right, the bike on the left are the same performance numbers. And again, the chart on the left, there's some more cars and bike matchup. You're not going to find huge differences with rare exception, where you might find a low-performing motorcycle, but generally we're all going to be really close to that number. Here's the interesting part. When I made that video and I'm making these declarations, what the average rider can do versus the capability of the bike, this is one of those places those numbers came from. So I look at the legal, if you go to court, what the judge and what the lawyers are all going to be saying you're going to be able to do, what the accident reconstructionists are going to say you're capable of, and they're going to say you're probably breaking around a 0.7. It turns out they're really accurate. We had 337 motorcycles that we tested. These were all trained riders on their own motorcycle during the riding season in controlled conditions. So this is like the perfect scenario. Nothing should go wrong. This is the numbers we came out with. So we already said the bikes can stop around 1G. The average rider stops around 0.7. And these are average trained riders with experience. They're licensed. These aren't beginners. None of these were beginner riders. So the green bar is ABS equipped motorcycles. The gray bar is non-ABS motorcycles. And you'll see those numbers are virtually identical. The average there was a 0.681 versus a 0.679. That means there's no difference. That's what that essentially boils down to. If you round it off, they're both a 0.68. Now, when we pull out the bikes, and we say, okay, how do the bikes perform with those riders? And remember, cruisers, sport bikes, and others are all going to stop around 1G. That's the capability of the motorcycle. But we did notice that the riders perform differently. The types of bikes they purchased, for whatever reason this came out, cruisers being at the bottom, they were the lowest performers, with the 0.62 being at the bottom end. And the highest performer with the ABS were the sport bikes, with the overall average being the other category. And the other category would be your adventure motorcycles, your dual sports, your sport touring bikes, your heavyweight sport tours, your Honda Goldwing, things like the Harley Ultra, they went into the cruiser category. So that kind of gives you some cross-section of what the riders were doing. So this is where these claims came from. When we made the video, it wasn't just randomly throwing stuff out. We had something here behind it. So let me explain. I'll come back to this here. When we look at these limits, when you look at a motorcycle, essentially the goal is to be about 50-50. You want both tires to carry about the same weight. When you're going down the road, that's about where it's at. We all know that when we brake really hard, we get more braking up on the front. And usually we hear, something like 70-30. That's a really old number. It's very, very conservative. More likely it's going to be 80 to 90% on average, and occasionally all the way up to 100% on the front, which means your rear is dropping down to only 10 to 20% of what the braking is. So that's where that traction loading is going. If you look at a car, cars carry a little higher bias. They're about a 60-40 to start with. And when they do their braking, they don't have quite as much forward loading. They end up with somewhere between 70 to 80 on the front. So they're not quite taking as much to the front of this. And when we say that we cannot stop faster than cars, part of it is not about surface area. Because if I ask you and I said, all right, everybody, what do you think? Cars or bikes? And of course, we already gave you the punchline here. We know that the cars are going to stop in emergency situations better than us because it requires no skill to pull that 1G. All they have to do is stomp on the pedal. Where bikes, even with ABS, we're underperforming that. But it turns out in really poor conditions, sand, rain, panic, anything that is a traction limitation, we will never get close to the automobile. And the reason is when we're looking at points of contact, when that bike is carrying a load up on the front, and let's just go really conservative, and we'll say it's only 80-20. And chances are it's higher than that. And the car, we're going to be, we'll say 70-30. So what's going to happen, it's not about surface area because it turns out it's about pounds per square inch. That's where your traction comes from. And what happens is that when that bike starts to slide, if there's any kind of loss of traction, even with ABS, every time I lose traction, I'm losing 80%. When I lose traction on one point of contact for the car, I'm losing 35%. I've got 4 different points of contact jockeying for traction constantly. And on the bike, I've only got the 2. And if I'm really good, this might be 90 to 100% on the front, which means in an emergency situation, we're pretty much hosed, right? We have to think through this stuff so we're not using our emergency braking. That's what keeps us alive. It's planning. It's not relying on these things going, well, my bike's lighter. Well, you don't have the pressure, your braking system matches, and you have less points of contact. It's not about surface area, it's about contact and pressure. So that's why you're not going to win in those bad situations. Here's what I want to make sure we get away with is to go, all right, so we know there's a limitation. We know the motorcycle is at that 1G. How do I get beyond the 0.7? What's going on? How do I get better as a rider? If we think about speed and distance, and when we say speed, we're talking about speed application of the brake, not speed of the motorcycle, and distance of travel. What we're going to look at is the way we apply the brakes is going to make all the difference. In a casual stop, what we end up doing is we start down here and we kind of ramp it up. And then just before you kind of get to that stop sign, you kind of drop off a little bit of pressure. Well, when we look at traction, there's a threshold that's always sitting there. And if all you did was come to every single stop and went, I'm going to just start squeezing, 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 at some point you're going to pass it. But that threshold isn't a fixed location. When we're doing this ramping up, when we ramp our braking like this, it turns out that threshold follows us as well. So if we're looking at the front brake, as I load to the front, my threshold actually increases. I have more traction available, so I'm not right at that limit. Remember, threshold is not when you don't have traction. Threshold is when you break through the traction. That's when you go up on the stoppie, that's when you break traction. Turns out it's about 10% slip is where that number is. Otherwise, you're well below that number. So let's come back and look at this again. If I'm doing an emergency stop, instead of just doing this nice and casual, what's going to happen is I'm going to ramp up and I'm going to keep squeezing. And you've probably done that during one of the classes. And if you look at this from a graph standpoint, you're going to have your threshold will be down here, and as you ramp up, that threshold is going to move with you, right? That's the idea, right? Is to come up to that threshold and then match it. That's the goal. But this area in here is where your 0.7 comes from. That's because you take a long time to get to that. And I'm going to end with talking why ABS is going to make you a much, much, much better rider. The goal here, if we look back at this graph, is to go, I want to get as near that threshold as quickly as possible. I want to close that gap. I'm not going to grab, but I need to ramp it up much, much faster. So if the threshold is here, what I want to do is ramp up very, very quickly and then be able to track that for a much longer period of time. This is what the expert is trying to do. They're trying to cut down on that much quicker. They get the threshold up faster and they close the gap. The problem is, how many of you, by the way, I can see you in the camera, how many of you are still riding bikes that are non-ABS? I can't hear you, so you have to show of hands. All right, excellent. You guys are, it's going to take you a lot longer to learn how to reach threshold. And the reason is, I'm going to tell you, go back to that last graph I was talking about, which is, if threshold is here, I'm going to have you come up, and I want you to find threshold all the way here towards the end of the stop. If you have a non-ABS bike, essentially what I'll do is you ramp up that stop, and when you think you're right at the very, very, very limit of braking, right here at the end, basically when your foot wants to come off of the foot peg, give it a little more squeeze. Because at that point, either you're going to get a little stoppy, or you get maybe a little 1 or 2 foot, about a half a meter push on the front tire, which isn't a big deal. But once you sense and you can feel what that threshold feels like, then you can back up and back up and back up and back up. Turns out it takes a long time to get the confidence, the feel, and the understanding to get all the way back. So that's the way you're going to do that. Those of you with ABS, you're in a great spot because you have a magic genie. And if you make a mistake, that magic genie, that ABS is going to take over and go, don't worry about it, I got this one. Right? You just lay back, we'll try again later. What's going to happen for you is with the thresholds here, the first time, because you want to find out what the bike is capable of, test where that ABS is. Find out. Stomp and grab. Come down at a lower speed at a safe location and see what the ABS will do. And you want to do it at a speed that you can replicate on a regular basis. So pick a speed that's slow that you can do every single time. Because what you're going to do is go, what will the ABS do? And then can I do that same stop without engaging the ABS? You have a target. You have something to work towards. What will happen is as you start developing your skill set with ABS, you'll start ramping up. The threshold is just above you. And when you think you're at the threshold. When you think you're really close, all you should be able to do is just breathe a little more on the lever. If the ABS doesn't engage, you weren't at threshold. If the bike just slows down more, you weren't doing as well as you thought you were. Most of us are going to be down here somewhere. And when you brake more, you're just going to slow more. And that's the idea, is can you get right to that limit with ABS? These are two different dogs. One is ABS equipped, one is non-ABS equipped. I'm sure you can figure out which one's which. Turns out that we can't beat ABS starting in around 2014. So I have three different bikes here, and the one in the middle you'll notice is a 2014 Ducati Monster 1200S. The braking numbers for ABS off and ABS on are different, and the ABS won. Even the professionals in a controlled environment couldn't beat the bike. And I did some testing with this back in 2014. I had a 2014 Triumph Tiger XC. And I was doing some testing with ABS on, ABS off. And the way I test ABS on is I come down with the bike, I set the speed. We always have radar so we can gauge distance. We do distance corrections, of course, as well. So depending where you apply the brake. And I would do my best stop with the ABS. Several measures to make sure we had a constant. I would turn the ABS off, and then I would do several stops. That particular motorcycle in 2014, I could best the bike at around 60 kilometers an hour by about 1 meter. When I turned the ABS, so that was ABS on versus ABS off. I went back and went, how well can I do if I do my best stop with the ABS system on without engaging ABS? And it turns out I beat it by almost, well, about 2/3 of a meter. So I'm beating it by almost 2 meters with ABS on versus the ABS only. And what happens is, and this Ducati makes a lot of sense if you think about it, we talk about that weight transfer going forward. And as that weight transfer comes forward on those adventure bikes, on the sport bikes, you'll end up with liftoff. The back end's going to come off the ground at some point. It's going to be so light there's no traction. The ABS allows it to continue to have rolling friction, rolling traction during that braking process, causing the stop to be even less. So ABS allows you not only to train to be better as a rider, but it'll actually enhance our skill sets as well. So that is kind of a plug towards that if you don't already have one. But most importantly, I wanted you to understand what you can do to better your braking and where that realistic performance level may be. Practice doesn't necessarily make you better, meaning you won't become perfect if you practice imperfect braking. Does that make sense? Because what practice does is build habits. You have to be able to find that threshold and then replicate that with braking. That's where training comes in. That's where using radar and measurements come in so that you know you're practicing the right stuff, so you're building the proper habits.